I started a business 6 months ago, ended up losing $100,000 and closing the door in less than 6 months. I'm going to walk you through step by step why that happened and be able to teach you some lessons in terms of what to look for when acquiring or starting a new business. But specifically in this situation, it's acquiring a business, some red flags to look for, and making sure that you understand exactly what you're getting into when you look at acquiring a business. Okay, so step one when you're looking to acquire a business is you want to look at how the business is currently run. Is it owner operated or is it operated like your typical business where you have employees? And this is why this is important. Typically, when it's owner operated, the expenses are going to be lower because the owner is not going to be taking maybe that much income out of the business. Thus, the net profit margins and the net profit of the business will look higher. And this is exactly what happened to me when I acquired my business. When I acquired my business, the profits were amazing. When you looked at the profits compared to the expenses, the business was generating some pretty good revenue and profits. And so my thought process was, if I could acquire this business, I would be able to maintain this same level of profit. However, I wasn't going to be stepping into this business as an owner operator. When I looked at it, I didn't calculate that expense, which would have actually given me the real profit number of the business. So as I looked at that right off the bat, when I acquired the business, my expenses went up substantially when I had to hire somebody to deliver on the services. So that's one of the first steps that you want to look at, is to try to identify the true profit of the business based on how it's operated. So the second step that you want to look at is essentially whether or not the revenue is going to be recurring or if it's one time. Now, this is really important because you look at forecasting out the business profits and revenue. You want to understand if that is something you can expect to continue or if you're going to need to generate new customers each and every time. So for me, when I acquired the salon business, it was a large customer base that did facials. And for most of you that may be familiar with that, it's typically a recurring revenue source that you can expect to get. Now, in my situation, when I didn't look deep enough to identify that most of these customers had only been serviced one time. Now, that can be a huge opportunity as a business owner stepping in to say, hey, if I can activate a certain percentage of these customers, that's going to give me a huge lift and just perfect add-on to the existing profit. And that was my thought process. So off the bat, I had a certain figure in mind, a percentage in mind of these customers that had been to the salon only one time, that if I were to convert 10% of them would add X amount of profit and revenue to the business. So when I looked at that, I was very conservative in my approach, and it was one of the reasons that I ended up acquiring the business because this assumption. All right, so let's talk about step three. We've already talked about understanding how the business is operated. We've talked about how the revenue is generated, whether or not it's recurring or one time. Now we're going to talk about the quality of customers. So you want to look at the customers, and it goes hand in hand somewhat with how the revenue is generated, whether or not it's recurring or one time. But you also want to look at the type of clientele that you're going to be working with. You want to look at things such as the demographic. You want to see if it's potentially a good fit to continue to work with these clients going forward. So again, in my case, when I acquired the salon, there was about 350 unique clients. One of the things that I missed, and it is something that you would have to dive a little bit deeper into, but I would highly recommend it, just learning from my mistakes, is that a lot of these customers I didn't verify. Even just getting an authorization to make a few phone calls to these customers just to maybe get an idea of the quality of the experience, what brought them in, and in my case, just to validate if they were even real customers. What I found out is after acquiring the business and doing multiple outreach, everything from email to phone to text message, I couldn't get a response from any of these customers. I even went so far as to offer a free facial and got zero response. So that was a red flag right there, that these customers either may not be engaged at all, or maybe these weren't real customers at all. So as you're looking to acquire a business, understand the quality of the client and even ask to make a few phone calls. If you get a no to that question, I would use that as a red flag that maybe there's some issues underlying within this business. So be very careful and make sure that you understand the type of clients you will be inheriting. Okay, We're going to talk about liquidity, something that's extremely important. 9 times out of 10, a business goes out of business because they run out of money. And so having a good, strong liquidity plan in place ensures that you're giving yourself enough runway to get through those first few months. So using my case, again, as another example, I'd done a pretty good job and I had prepped to basically say if we made zero money for 3 months, we would be fine. Thinking that, once again, based on the business model, the recurring income, the clientele base, our acquisition strategy, there would be virtually no way that we would go 3 months without being able to get some revenue or some profit. Well, I was wrong. So within the first 3 months, we didn't get any revenue or any profit. And in fact, I'll talk about this in a next segment. We inherited clients that had prepaid for services. So we were, in a sense, having to honor those services with expenses that were coming out of our budget in which we were getting no revenue from. So not only were we not generating any new revenue, but we were actually having to increase expenses to honor existing services. So liquidity plans are very important. You want to make sure it's a good mix. Ideally, cash is most important because you're not having to pay any type of interest, and it's funds that you should have available anyways for your business. But if you do have access to other types of lines of credit or any other sources of income or liquidity, I should say, make sure you have a good plan in place. I would say, just given my experience, you're probably looking at more like 6 months, maybe even a year worth of liquidity just to make sure that you are well prepared in case you hit one of those dry spells where you're not generating enough revenue or profit. All right, I touched on this a little bit before, but talking about the type of client that you are inheriting, I'm going to add on to that. It's really understanding the quality of experience that these customers have had in the past. You want to make sure that for the most part, it's not going to be every time, that most of these clients had a very positive experience so that you know if you continue to work with them, they will continue to work with you. In my case, once again, something I did not do enough due diligence on was taking a look at the Google reviews. After the fact, I took a look at a lot of the Google reviews and found a good amount of negative reviews. Now, again, it wasn't a lot of negative reviews, but nonetheless, what I didn't do was actually look detailed into the actual reviews themselves. I looked at them as a whole and said, hey, the reviews, out of most of them, it's an average of a 4-star review for the business. Chances are we're in good shape. After looking through the details of a lot of these reviews, I picked up a very consistent pattern. And in this case, a lot of these previous clients felt that they were treated unfairly and that they felt that what they were coming in for was more of a sales pitch, not an actual service. So as I started to find a theme there, I started to get concerned. Very soon after we acquired the business, we started getting a lot of clients that had prepaid for packages and devices coming back and wanting refunds on a lot of those devices, which obviously put us in a very tough spot because as a business that was trying to start to generate new revenue and profit, we already had the expenses associated with the services that we honored, but now we were getting asked to give refunds on devices that were between $800 to $1,000. In addition to that, we don't have time to go into too much detail today, but long story short, a lot of these clients had no idea what they were getting into, which again were issues that we had to deal with after the fact. So when looking at your clients, make sure that you understand the full quality of experience and dive down as deep as you can. And I'll tie that back into one of the previous videos I talked about, which is getting permission to make a few phone calls to random clients, not clients that they tell you to call, but random clients so that you can get a true idea of what that client experience was in the past. This was probably the biggest mistake I made, which is knowing the industry. I got into this industry because I purely looked at it from a business standpoint and looked to see how profitable these types of businesses were. But I had no idea about anything regarding the industry. I had nothing to do with beauty, nothing to do with salons, any of that. I was relying on somebody to bring that expertise to the table, so I felt pretty comfortable in acquiring the business, knowing that I had somebody that had a good amount of knowledge. Once again, whether or not you have somebody as the individual that is acquiring the business, it's extremely important that you know the industry inside and out. What I learned from this experience is that a few things. Number one, when we looked at marketing and trying to generate new business, I was advertising the wrong message. I was marketing the wrong way. And again, a lot of that had to do with the fact that I wasn't familiar with the industry. On top of that, I was putting together packages and pricing that didn't really match the competitive landscape. So there was a lot of learnings that I had. And the problem with learnings when you first acquire a business is that you don't have a lot of time to figure that out. So again, in my case, we ran out of runway before I was able to make those adjustments because I didn't have a full understanding of the industry. Okay, so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the actual offering and how you're getting new clients. Once again, I learned a lot from this experience that if I would have gone through some of the materials that I read after the fact, I would have been able to put some offers out there and do some marketing that would have led to more success than I saw. So the first thing you want to do is be able to come up with an offer that nobody is going to refuse. And so for those of you that have followed Alex Hormozi, he has a great pattern and a great book set, $100 million offers, $100 million leads, and $100 million money models. I read this, unfortunately, after the fact. But as you walk through his system, it really brings a different perspective to mine, starting with just a basic offer. A lot of times as business owners and entrepreneurs, you'll look at competitive landscape, you look at maybe what the competition's doing, and you'll try to tweak a little bit just to kind of differentiate yourself from them. What I learned is that when you look at offers, you need to understand from the client's point of view all the different reasons why they wouldn't want to proceed with an offer with you, outside of just price, outside of just benefits and features, but understanding what their pain points, understanding why it is, whether it's time, whether it's hassle, whatever it is, and being able to build a response to those types of pain points that they may have. So starting with a good solid offer is where you want to go. In my case, I started with the marketing. So I skipped ahead and I started marketing what I thought was a good offer, but in reality, it wasn't anything much different than what else was happening out in the competitive marketplace. So start with a strong offer, really dig deep, and make sure that you have something that doesn't just differentiate yourself from the competition, that really makes sure that you address all the client's pain points, and that you make sure that, again, per Alex Hormozi, it's an offer that people would feel stupid refusing. Okay, so we're going to continue down the marketing path of building a good, solid offer for your business. The next step, as I mentioned, for me, I read the book $100 Million Leads through Alex Hormozi. Fantastic book. And essentially what it does is it helps you to understand really 4 different components as it relates to marketing and advertising your business and how to get the proper leads. One of my biggest takeaways was identifying warm leads. In a lot of cases, many of us will jump straight to the cold leads and think advertise, advertise, advertise. Looking at your warm leads, which can be really anybody that you know, anybody that you've had any type of conversation with, whether it's social media, friends and family, people that you've connected with through networking events, and starting there. Share with them a little about what you're trying to do, who you're looking to help. And one of the great ways that you can also get your business started is by offering some of these services for free just to get testimonials and get some feedback. Again, when you are starting out in business, you're going to be trying to feel out whether or not your offer is valuable enough based on the price that you're selling, what the process looks like, and understanding what those pain points are for the customers. The second component is looking at areas that you can market your business to a mass audience. Once again, you're looking at warm leads. So if you have social media, if you have other ways to get your message out to multiple individuals, there's a structure that you want to put in place for that. The next component is how do you attack cold leads? And this is where most business owners usually jump to right off the bat. This is where you get into your advertising. I won't go into detail onto that because that would be a whole separate video in itself. But those are 3 components that I would say you really want to focus on right off the bat to try to generate a good amount of feedback and then also start to get some good solid leads in for your business. All right, I just realized I forgot the 4th component of leads. I said there were 4, I only mentioned 3 of them. But the third one that I mentioned around cold leads is kind of a combination. There's two components into that. One is when you're actively just trying to do some cold outreach, you're not necessarily paying for it. And then that fourth component is actually paid advertising to cold leads. And so for me, again, just a quick recommendation, what I've used, which has been very valuable on the cold outreach that doesn't cost, I mean, it has some cost to it, but there's not like a paid advertising component to it, is Apollo IO, which is a great way for you to narrow down your target audience, and you can actually set up some recurring email and additional types of structure in place to do cold outreach to your niche market. So forgot that, just wanted to make sure I added that fourth in there. The last component we'll talk about is money models. And again, a great learning experience for me is that when I did set up the business, I went out with just the generic offers, facials, memberships, but didn't really have a model in place to kind of bring everything together. And as I mentioned in the early video that I had, liquidity is a huge issue for most business owners. Having the right money model in place is a great way to make sure that you don't run out of money. And again, I won't spend a lot of time, but essentially for those of you that are interested in getting more information, I would look at getting Alex Hormozi's book, $100 Million Money Models. It was a great tool for me to understand it. Unfortunately, it was too late after we had to close down the business. But essentially, you're looking at different ways to take advantage of the people that do come in. So sitting down with them with the different offers that you have, right? The first part that we talked about, and then turning around and how to build a model that's going to capitalize either on getting money up front so that you continue to fund your advertising to bring in more customers, or looking at ways to generate recurring income through memberships. So there's several different money models that you can build, and how you build them is essentially off some of the offers that you create at the very beginning. So wrapping this up, unfortunately, I read these books too late, but I would highly recommend reading them in order, because that's the other mistake I made. As I started with the Money Models book and then realized I don't really have a good offer. So then I had to go back to the offer, and then I went to the leads. And so what I would say is for those of you that are looking to start your business, these are great books to read. I would highly recommend them. I'm actually looking at doing these types of strategies for my Harvest Wealth Management business. So you'll start to see some themes in terms of what I'm doing that aligns with the information in those books. Okay, so let's talk about the last component or last step that I would look at as you're looking to acquire a business. So we've talked a lot about in different videos that we've done. This one I would say is probably the most critical one, and it's making sure that you have the right leadership in place. Making sure that the individuals that you are either inheriting from the business that you're acquiring, or the individuals that you're looking to bring on, even whether it's yourself. A lot of times what I would recommend is that you do have somebody outside of yourself that can take on a leadership role. Because the reality is although you will have all of your focus and energy on your business, there will be times where you'll need somebody to kind of step in and help you out continuing to run the business. So in my particular situation, again, another learning for me is I had an individual that I had gone into the business with that I felt had strong leadership skills and somebody that would be able to run the business while I wasn't there. Because in my case, I was an absentee owner. I basically put the capital up front, brought somebody in that had the knowledge in the industry, and then also had the expectation that this individual would have the leadership skills necessary to run the day-to-day operations. Well, I found out very early on that unfortunately this individual did not have those skills. Not to say they weren't a bad person, but these were skills that, for most of you that know, you have to develop over a period of time. Leadership skills do not happen overnight. And so as you look at building your team, it has to start from the top down. A lot of entrepreneurs and business owners will start from the bottom up, meaning their goal is to start by hiring the boots on the ground or the individuals that are going to be able to deliver the services or operate the business. I would argue that you want to start from the top down. Identify the right leaders, which, yes, they are going to be more expensive. It is going to be a higher cost, but it does two things. One, it relieves some of those job duties off of your plate. But then additionally to that, you have an individual that can go out and hire the right people and bring that type of culture and that type of employee engagement that will be necessary for you to grow and scale your business. Okay, so let's recap what we've talked about today. all of what we mentioned in 20 minutes is not nearly enough to cover what it takes to look at acquiring a business, but hopefully this kind of gives you just some ideas and some tips to start with. We talked about starting with understanding how the business is operated. Is it owner operated, or is it a true business where you have employees that run the business? We talked about looking at areas such as clients, understanding the quality of the clients, the client experience, taking it a step further, getting permission to reach out to a few clients to get some feedback. We talked about recurring revenue versus one-time revenue and understanding what type of business you would be acquiring so that you can expect and turn into, what type of game plan that you want to build around the business. We talked about how to come up with an offer, how to generate leads, and how to put together money models. I spent 2 minutes on that. I would highly recommend that you get the books through Alex Hormozi, the $100 million offers, leads, and money models. It'll give you a great start to being able to understand how to build your business. We talked about leadership, making sure that you have the right individual or individuals in place to be able to operate and build that employee engagement, that culture within your company. Starting from the top down rather than the bottom up is going to allow you to build a solid team. So as I mentioned those and as I walked through those are exactly the intangible assets that I go through with my customers as they are getting ready to exit their business. It's important that you start from the beginning. So when I talk to my clients, we'll look at employee capital. So we're going to look to see, do you have the right leadership in place so that they are building the right culture within your company and the right engagement. We're going to look at client capital. Just talked about understanding the type of clients that you have, recurring revenue versus one-time revenue. Again, you want to make sure that you try to build that recurring revenue because to a potential buyer down the line, that's what they're going to look at, just as you should be looking at that when you acquire your business or start your business. A lot of these same concepts apply to starting a business just as much as acquiring a business. We looked at marketing or brand capital, the different things that you can do to start since the very beginning to create a very differentiated offer, have a very solid procedure in place to generate new leads, and then how your money models are brought together. Again, I spent 2 minutes on this, not nearly even touching the tip of the iceberg. I'd highly recommend that you go out and get Alex Hormozi's books, $100 million offers, leads, and money models to at least get your process started. Very, very good books. Again, unfortunately, I read them after the fact. Would have wished I would have ran them before the fact. But that branding component is one of the employee capitals. The one area that we didn't really dive into too much, which is that fourth component, which is your structural capital, and that's mainly your policies and procedures. That's also looking at the technology you have, the systems and processes. Essentially, how do you run your business in a very efficient and effective way? So that being said, these are all just some tips you can take as you look at starting your business so that as you continue to build it, you are building a solid business that eventually, when you are ready to exit, you're going to have a very attractive business for a potential buyer down the road.